Hi everyone, my name's Jack, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Activities Officer for this year, and I'm doing my Scrutiny Report video today. Regarding the Societies Council and the grant funding revamp that I talked about, the question was, how accessible will this be, and how has it been made easier for students, i.e. will there be guidance for groups on applying? For those of you who don't know, grant funding exists as a source of money for student groups to apply for if they want to run an event or activity that sort of stretches their aims and objectives that they might not be able to do normally. They can apply for up to £1,500 and it is approved by the Societies Council, which is chaired by me. So originally the way grant funding worked is it was quite complicated and I'd say quite off-putting. Essentially you had an Excel spreadsheet, you had to talk about what you wanted to use the funding for, where you plan to store it, all sorts of questions like that, as well as a complex sort of breakdown of the finances, including your transactions and how you use the money and where it would go. And of course that is important information, but sometimes it makes things a little bit more difficult to bring yourself to do them. And essentially, one of the big things that we cut out was the idea that you needed to contribute a minimum of 50% of the funds to receive grant funding. We still advise that you do that, and it does mean that your grant funding request will be more likely to be accepted, but we've removed it from as a requirement. Now it's a Microsoft form survey, so essentially that just means it's a lot easier to go through the different pages, explaining why things are there, and not having a massive bulk load Excel spreadsheet to look at. One of the other things was that we made some of the questions wording a little bit nicer. So originally when they asked about storage, it was essentially more of a, what are you going to do with your items, where are you putting them? Whereas now it's, oh, would you like to use our storage? Is more the aim of the question. To show how successful it is, we've had up to £30,000 of applications received, which is a lot more than last year, where we only had £1,000 at this time of year, and it's the most we've had in potentially the history of the Students' Union, so it's a great success. So on the topic of the starter fund for new student groups, the question is, how will this differ from grant funding and what benefits do you hope this will bring? The reason that the new student group starter fund was proposed was essentially because grant funding doesn't exist to work that way. There frankly isn't enough money to cover all new student groups as a starter fund. The process takes too long. New student groups will need the money a lot sooner than they would get it from if they were applied to grant funding, and it would need to be approved. And generally the way grant funding works is we want them to exceed their aims and objectives by new events and different activities, whereas a new student group starter fund wouldn't necessarily fall under that category. And so it's good to have a new student group starter fund completely separately. It's just an opt-in process, you don't need to be approved, it's quite fast and it helps with things like freshers, first events, promotion. The issue with starting a new student group, as I experienced, is you need money to create the events to promote your society to new students. But in order to run events, you need money, and so you need to already have the students in order to get the funding to help run the activities. So it's a cycle that you can't really break out of that easily, and hopefully this new student group starter fund will help to break that away. Guidance on how to apply for grant funding is within the committee training and online in the grant funding guidelines, but if anyone has any difficulties, feel free to contact us. And additionally, we allow students to provide feedback when they receive either approval or rejection on grant funding as to how they want the process changed. The topic is room bookings, and the question is, further work has been noted. What future improvements will be looked at? So the way room bookings work at the moment is that we use something called Resource Booker, which is a system that staff members at the university and the Students' Union have access to. If we book a space for a society to use for their activity, we have to include all sorts of things like information on what needs to be arranged for them, for porters, and we also need to send out confirmation emails and make sure all sorts of spreadsheets are filled out. It's needlessly complicated and it takes time, and that's why we have the 2 weeks at the moment. But thankfully, the university staff have agreed that they will make the system a lot easier. So essentially, we put in the information by default into Resource Booker, we send it off, and that's the end of it from us. The confirmation email is sent to the student groups when it's done, and that should save some time, especially on our end, but that improves the student group experience. The next steps, which were also agreed by the university, are to allow students themselves to ask to use a meeting room. So not things like dance spaces, but mainly if you just wanted to have sort of a group study space or a committee meeting, like it is with the library. and it will be sent straight to us, and we will either approve or reject it for whatever reason, and that's it. There's no more complicatedness to that whole system, and that will make booking meeting rooms so much easier. So that was all the questions for my scrutiny report video. I hope that cleared things up. If you have any other questions, feel free to contact me. My email is su-activities@le.ac.uk.